Before we have a longer break, Nico Vermeir will try to convince us that the desktop development is alive and kicking. If you have questions for Nico, put them in the Q&A section and we will answer them after the presentation. Good luck, Nico.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me here on this presentation on the revival of .NET desktop development. Let me first start off by saying it's nice to meet you all. I wish we could have met in person, but yeah, things are what they are. So who am I? I'm a .NET architect at Real Dolman. I've been a Microsoft's MVP in Windows development since 2014. And here in Belgium, together with some friends, I run a user group called Madden, where we focus on mobile development within the Microsoft space. You can always find me on Twitter. If you want to chat or have a question, feel free to hit me up over there. Now, let's start off with a disclaimer. All of the demos I'm going to show you today are done in Visual Studio 2019 Preview. Everything is done using .NET 5 Release Candidate 2. So I'm using beta frameworks on beta IDEs, so things will go wrong. I might get some unexpected errors. I might need to restart Visual Studio a few times, but that's all normal, seeing the state that the bits are in. Okay, so where is this talk focused? The talk is mainly starting from the .NET Core 3 timeframe all the way up to .NET 5 that's coming in, I believe, a week or two. So with .NET Core 3, Microsoft released a few very interesting bits to us developers. For starters, we got C# 8 with a bunch of very cool new language features. We got .NET Standards 2.1, we got some more stuff, and we got support for desktop development. Seeing that .NET Core was mostly focused on the web and the cloud up until then, this was actually a very nice added value to the .NET Core framework. They also released a statement that WPF and WinForms are back in active development. They're actually working on the frameworks again. They have dedicated resources to those teams. They are adding new features to it. There are brand new designers that I will show in a few minutes. They're actually developing it again. But everyone you talk to claims that desktop development is dead. Native desktop applications are done. Everything is on the web now. So, and this is usually the part in the talk where I ask people for a show of hands on how many people are actually still doing WPF or WinForms development, either in a legacy application or actually building new applications. It's a bit harder to do here on the online platform, but usually the show of hands is quite impressive, much more than you would expect. And it amazes me every single time. I've done this talk quite a few times already, and it amazes me every single time again. Now, these numbers that I'm showing here, these are a few years old already, but like 2.4 million developers are building desktop applications in Visual Studio. And this was before .NET Core re-released desktop development. And there are over 900 million devices running Windows 10. So the opportunity is there. There's a big market for building desktop applications for Windows 10. So what does .NET Core 3 bring to the desktop space? Well, for starters, .NET Core is a cross-platform framework. So meaning that the bits they have for web development, for cloud development, you can build it on Windows, on Linux, on Mac. You can build it everywhere. WPF and WinForms are not cross-platform, and they are tied in to Windows really, really hard. So it was quite impossible for Microsoft to just pull it out of Windows and make them cross-platform. That's just not possible. So to keep the cross-platform identity of .NET Core, they've decided to release desktop packs. So if you want to do .NET Core, you can still do it cross-platform. If you want to do desktop development in .NET Core, you can use one of the desktop packs, and then you need to work on Windows only. So what do we get? We get some command line features. We can do .NET New WPF, .NET New WinForms from the command line. We can actually build and run applications from command line using the .NET CLI. We also get Xaml Islands. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, Xaml Islands is a feature where we can use the modern UWP controls, the modern XAML controls, and we can take those and put them in a WPF and even a WinForms application. And I will show you this in a demo. One of the examples is a text box with ink capabilities, like the text box in a UWP app supports inking. You can, if you have a tablet with pen support, you can just write in the text box and it will recognize what you've written. Using XAML Islands, you can bring that into your very old WinForms application if you want, no problem. Other examples are maps. If you want a modern map control, you can just put it in there. And even the web browser. And this is actually the demo that I'm going to show you. The web control that's currently in WinForms or in WPF is old. So we can replace it using XAML Islands with the newer UWP control. We get high DPI support for those fancy screens. We get API access for all the Windows 10 APIs. So every single API that was previously only available to UWP apps, we get access to now as well. And we can make our applications self-contained, meaning that if we write a desktop application and we ship it to our users, they don't need to have the correct .NET Framework version installed anymore. We can just include the entire framework in our application. Now, this sounds like a great advantage, and it is, but it also comes with great responsibility. Like a famous comic book character always says. Since you are shipping the .NET Framework version with your app, that means that you're responsible for doing the security updates. If Microsoft releases new security updates for .NET Core, then you're responsible to build an update to your app that includes the new security features. If you don't, your application will probably work just fine, but it might have some vulnerabilities that can get exposed. So that's something important to keep in mind. Now, should you immediately go to .NET Core with your existing application? There are a few things you can do. For starters, if you have an application that's just in maintenance mode, but it's still being used, you might consider to just update to the latest full .NET framework, being for 4.8. That's the latest release. It will be the final release of the full .NET framework. And it has long-term support. So if you're still maintaining your application, consider at least updating to 4.8. Shouldn't give you too many problems, but at least you're supported for security updates. If you're working on actually delivering new features to your application, or you're going to start a new desktop application project, then you should probably think about going to .NET Core. And then you're immediately future-proof. There are some differences between the .NET Core flavor of WPF and WinForms and the full .NET framework, and I will get into those a bit later. But overall, you should be good to go. So the feature gap is closing pretty fast. And with feature gap, I mean the difference between the full .NET framework and .NET Core. .NET Core was a complete blank slate. They restarted writing .NET from the ground up. So of course, there's going to be a feature gap. Not all the .NET features will eventually make it over, But as of now, .NET 5, I believe, will ship with about 80% of all the full .NET features. And they can, if you count in all the open pull requests for .NET 5, you will get about 90%. So they are getting there. .NET 5 is still in preview today. I believe they will release it around the 10th of November, something like that. So yeah, the feature gap is really getting closer. You should be good to go to just start using .NET Core. So from .NET 5 on, this will be the only flavor of .NET that's out there. 4.8 is the final release of the full framework. .NET Core 3.1 that we're on now is the final release of .NET Core, and .NET Core will evolve into .NET 5 to keep things simple, you know. So only one .NET, single runtime, and there are two drop-in replacements. So depending on the platform that you compile for, you're either running on the core CLR or on Mono. So .NET is more than just web and desktop. It also includes Xamarin, which will be renamed to Maui around the .NET 6 timeframe. So one .NET across the entire scheme of platforms that you can use. All right, let's dive into some demos. Let's see. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, like Lindsay said, and I will just let them gather there, and I will get to them at the end of the presentation. Okay, first of all, I have a PowerShell here. Let's see what version I'm on. I'm running .NET 5 RC2. Okay, I'm in the CLI folder. Let's start a new WinForms project, and let's call it Core Demo Forms. The templates, there we go. CD into the folder. So we have our CS project, we have a form 1, we have a designer, we have a program CS. We should just be able to do .NET run. It's building my application now, and it's launching it on the wrong screen. Here we are. This is my WinForms application running on .NET 5, all done through command line. Okay, let's do the same with WPF. And this I'll open in Visual Studio. Actually, I accidentally created in the forms folder, but it's okay. And I'm going to use the preview. If you're using the .NET 5 preview bits, you need the Visual Studio preview as well. It won't work in the stable version of Visual Studio. Visual Studio is opening up on the other screen again. I have to wait until it becomes responsive. Here we go. So if I look at my project properties, you'll see that I'm running on .NET 5. I can switch to .NET Core if I want to, but .NET 5 is where all the new goodies are, so that's where we'll stay. Let's have a look at the main window. Microsoft has created a brand new XAML designer for us. Works quite similar to the old one, but a bit more stable. So this is the brand new designer. We have our toolbox. Once it initializes, there we go. We can drop some controls on here. Okay, let's, for example, give this text box a name. Come on, Visual Studio, you can do this. my text box. If I select the text block, I take my properties, I can create a data binding. And this was actually disabled up until a few releases ago, I think. If you ever used the actual XAML designer, then you know this is quite an important feature. Let's see. Text. Okay, so what I've done now, I've created a binding on the text property of the text block to bind to the text property of the text box. Meaning that if I run this application, once it compiles, here we go. As soon as I start editing the text block updates, nothing spectacular. Everyone who's done some XAML data binding stuff, this is pretty normal. And what I actually wanted to show is that if we edit the text here, you'll see that the binding updates even in the designer. So the designer is actually running our code. The old designer did this as well, but it took the new designer quite some time to get this properly. So that's working now. The designer is getting pretty stable. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So where are we at? .NET Core 3 and 3.1 were released last year. .NET 5 is coming. We have the XAML designer. We even have the WinForms designer. And this was also quite the project, apparently. The WinForms designer took a long time to get out there for .NET Core. And once we got the first version, it actually didn't work at all. You could create a new project, you could open the form, and it would show up. But as soon as there were a few controls on there, or you added some styling, then the entire designer was just broken. It didn't work at all. And then that's been getting better and better, and it's actually in a state right now where it's usable. I haven't managed to make it crash in quite some time. So that's good. A small side note here. If you are doing WinForms and you really depend on the designer, you have really complex forms, and you can't make the new .NET Core designer actually do or work properly, then it might be an idea to check out Rider from JetBrains. They also have a WinForms designer, and that one is actually been pretty stable from the get-go. So that has been my designer of choice for quite some time when it comes to .NET Core WinForms. So in WinForms, in .NET Core, there are a few removed APIs, like things that are really old that they just decided not to port over to .NET Core. And there's a list online. This is a screenshot of that list. Also with the recommended replacement. So keep that in mind. If you are going to .NET Core and you know that your application comes before the .NET 4 timeframe, then you might have some APIs that are removed that you need to replace. The .NET timeline. So we are pretty close to .NET 5 release, and from that moment on, they will release a new .NET version every year. And every even numbered release, like 6, 8, and so on, will be long-term support. Every uneven will be short-term support. So that's kind of what they're thinking of doing in terms of conventions on releases. So if we want to port an application over from WinForms or WPF to .NET Core, what do you do? First of all, there's a Portability Analyzer. The Portability Analyzer will analyze your entire project and will give you an Excel file. And in that Excel file, it will show you all the namespaces that you're using, all the references that you're using, and it will show you how compatible that you are with .NET Core and .NET Standard. So that's a very important first step. If you're even considering of upgrading to .NET Core, this should be your first step. After that, you should move away from packages.config and migrate to package reference. Then we can upgrade to the latest .NET framework, being 4.8. And from 4.8 on, we can go to .NET Core. Any libraries that you're referencing, you should consider also migrating them to .NET Standard. And why .NET Standard? Because that means that you're making it compatible with a whole other range of frameworks besides of .NET Core. I don't know if you'll actually do it, but it might be useful. Once all your libraries are migrated, then you can actually migrate the app, and then you should actually run the app, of course. Port over your unit tests, make sure that they all succeed. And then comes actually the hardest part. You should test your application. Every single user story that you have, every single business case, edge case, this should all get tested again, the entire application, because things might have changed. Things that you might think are trivial might not work anymore. Now on GitHub, there's a tool called try-convert. It's from the .NET team. It's unsupported. It does get updated quite often. And it should be an automatic tool that migrates your application to .NET Core. Might be worth giving it a shot. Make sure that you can either revert your changes or have a copy somewhere, because it doesn't always work. It kind of depends on the complexity of your application. All of this is really well explained in the link at the bottom of this slide, which is the documentation on porting applications over. And let's actually try this. So the application that we'll be porting over is the application that we've used in our company 9 years ago to do the Great Post-it Battle of 2011. So our .NET team, which I was a part of back then, got challenged by the Java team for a Post-it war. The pictures are the result of that. And they couldn't figure out how we got these really nice images. And the secret there is that we actually had an application. It's called a Pixelator. Let me put it over here. I see some questions coming in. Just as a reminder, I'll be answering them at the end of the talk. So this is the Pixelator. If I select an image, it pixelates it. You can choose the grid size. Kind of simple thing. There's an about that should open a web page somewhere. Again, on the other screen, that's okay. So that's about it. Pretty simple WinForms application. There's the main form. It runs on .NET Framework 4. Let me just quickly start it again. So I've added an extra form to this. That's actually nothing more than a form with a web control in it. And this is the basic WinForms web control. So I've set it to open HTML5 test. And it says that I'm using IE 11 on Windows 8. Now I'm pretty sure I'm running Windows 10. So that goes to show you how old that's the control, that the built-in web control is. So we need to do something about that. But first, we need to upgrade our application itself. For starters, let's switch to .NET 4.8. Yes, I'm sure. So our application still compiles, so that's good. Our upgrade to 4.8 worked. Now, to do something about that ancient Webview control, I'm going to go to NuGet, and I'm going to add a Webview control from the Microsoft Toolkit. And while this is installing, let me show you the documentation for the Windows Community Toolkit. Come on. So the Windows Community Toolkit is actually started as the UWP Community Toolkit. And it has since then evolved to include controls for WinForms and WPF, as you can see here. And it includes a WebView control. Now, the note here says that even this WebView is already kind of deprecated and will get replaced by WebView 2. So what's the difference? The WebView here is actually the old Edge engine. You know, the modern Edge browser that Microsoft included in Windows 10. The not Chromium-based one, that's the WebView control. Now, why is it in the Windows Community Toolkit? It's basically a control that is used in Xaml Islands. But to set Xaml Islands up, to get a control to actually be used within Xaml Islands, it takes quite a lot of boilerplate code, some bootstrapping codes, and the Community Toolkit takes all of that away from us. It just gives us a control that we can drop in, and it just works. So that's nice. The WebView 2 is currently in preview, and that's the Chromium-based Edge control. So the WebView is installed. Let's open the form. I'm going to delete the old WebView. I'm going to go to my toolbox, drop in the new WebView. There we go. The code behind, because the API has changed a bit. So instead of webview control.url, to select the webview1.source. Let's see what happens. Web demo. It still shows IE11 on Windows 8. That's because for some reason in my configuration manager, my build got deselected. So build the application. And if everything goes right, the build will fail. It says I must use package reference. This is old, it's still using packages config, so I need to move on to the package reference. I can do this by right-clicking on the references and migrate packages config to package reference. It shows my top level and transitive dependencies. That's okay. I just have the WebView here. Go for it. So it will start by uninstalling all the packages from packages config. It will remove the packages config file and reinstall everything using package reference. I get a nice report stating that no issues were found. Perfect. Let's try to build. Build succeeded. I run my application. Score is still not what it should be, but at least it says I'm using Edge 18 on Windows 10. So I'm using a modern web control in my old WinForms application. So that's a step forward. All right, let's move on. I'm now ready to actually port this application over to .NET Core. First of all, I'm going to run my Portability Analyzer. Now, the Portability Analyzer is a Visual Studio extension. I have the extension installed, so I just need to right-click and analyze project portability. I'll let it do its thing. It's quite fast, not that big of a project. And I can open the report. So this is the summary. It says that my assembly Pixelator is 100% compatible with .NET Core and platform extensions version 3.1, but only 51% with .NET standards. And this was to be expected. If I look at the details, there's a lot of Windows.Forms namespaces in it. And all those Windows.Forms namespaces are not supported in .NET Standard, which makes sense because .NET Standard is the cross-platform framework. So there will be no Windows Forms namespaces to be found in .NET Standard. They are to be found in .NET Core using the desktop packs. But that's okay because my main application, the actual WinForms project, is .NET Core. So we're basically good to go. So how do we do this? Well, it's actually pretty simple. This is the WinForms project that was created using the command line in the first demo. I'm just going to copy the CS_proj file. I'm going to the Pixelator directory, paste it here, rename the current one to old, and give the new one the same name as the old one used to have. Go back into Visual Studio, reload my project. For some reason, it's it doesn't do it now. When I was dry running the demo earlier today, everything stayed red. So, yeah. It's one of the first times that the demo actually goes better than the preparation. One of the things you need to do is you need to remove the assembly info file because the information in there is duplicate. .NET Core has moved that to somewhere else, and it will actually complain if you try to build it this way. It's still set to build. My build still succeeds, but it shouldn't because I swapped out the CS_proj file, so the NuGet package that contains the new web view is not there anymore. The web view shouldn't exist anymore. And this is actually one of the bugs in the preview version of, I assume it's Visual Studio, but it's not actually building the project anymore. So this is where I need to restart Visual Studio once. Make sure to select the preview version. Let me close this one. Now the next thing I need to do is reinstall the NuGet package for the Webview Control, but it actually won't work anymore since I'm running on .NET 5. And the current version of the Webview Control, why does it still say that it succeeded? Nothing there. So the current version of the Webview Control is not compatible with .NET 5. It does install. It's Visual Studio that's still spinning up a bit. ReSharper doesn't help us. Doesn't help either. Come on. There we go. It installed the web view. Let's see if we can get this to fail. This is actually the first time that I want something to fail and it doesn't. Interesting. Okay, let me try restarting Visual Studio once more. Actually, let's clean out these. Okay, while this is starting up, let's have a look at the questions. Are there any reasons why you would still opt for a WinForms application when starting a new project? There are multiple reasons. One of them, one of the most likely, is probably the knowledge, the in-house knowledge. If you have WinForms developers in-house that are still maintaining applications and you need to start a new application, you might as well use their knowledge and start working or build your new application in WinForms. For example, in your opinion, would you make the switch now or wait for .NET 6 in light of its LTS status for a current WPF app in full active development? I would probably make the switch to .NET Core 3.1 since that is long-term supported, and then wait for .NET 6 to do an upgrade, yes. Let's see here. There we go. Back in business. So when I was preparing this, I suddenly got hit by this error. I had no idea where it comes from. I've done this demo quite a few times, and this was the first time. After searching online, I couldn't find anything or any reason why this should pop up. And then it hit me. It could probably be the NuGet package. So I uninstalled the Webview. I tried to build it again. Of course, it will fail because we're still referencing the Webview and we don't have it anymore. But the first error was gone. So the Webview or the toolkit, the Webview that's in the toolkit, in the community toolkit, is not compatible with .NET 5. So be careful with that one. We can fix this by going to NuGet and searching for the Webview 2 package. And this one is in preview. So we need to preview release, the pre-release. We can install that one. This form might crash because it doesn't have the Webview from the toolkit anymore. Oops. Did I miss one? Oh yeah. There we go. This is our empty form again. So we can now drop in the Webview 2. Make it a bit bigger. Go back to the code behind. Alt Webview 21 source. And we're good to go again on the Webview part. Now, something that's still missing, that was the errors we're getting now. The type or namespace logging does not exist. That's the class library that's added here. So we put our reference back, build a project. Build succeeded. Let's see if this runs. Here we go. WinForms running on .NET 5 with the new Webview Control H88 on Windows 10. So next thing to do is test our entire app. So let's load in an image. That one still works. That's good. My about crashes. So the thing about the about option, it does a process start and it just launches the GitHub where the original project is hosted. So that doesn't work. And this is one of those small changes between or differences between full.NET and .NET Core. And this is one of the reasons that you need to test your entire application, no matter how mundane it seems. They've changed this out too. Let me grab my code snippet here. This. So instead of just pasting in the URL to a website and letting process start handle it, we now need to create a process start info and set the use shall execute to true. And here we go. Small difference, but it did make our application crash. Now, let's have a look at some properties. So this is running .NET 5. That's good. Let's have a look at the project file. We are using the Microsoft.NET SDK. We have a WinExe, and we are targeting .NET 5-Windows. The -Windows is new for .NET 5, but that's our compiler know that we're doing a Windows application. We have the NuGet reference to WebView 2, and we have the project reference to the logging. The logging doesn't do quite that much, but I've added it just to show you this. We're actually referencing a .NET Framework 4 library, and that works. That code runs. So that's quite interesting to know as well. If you don't want to, if you have a lot of class libraries and you don't want to spend time porting them all over to .NET Standard, you can just reference the full .NET Framework version if it's not too old. I think below 4 it might not work. I haven't tried it. But since we're porting everything anyway, we might as well also port over our class library. And I have the CS brush already. So go here and paste it. Reload. We can remove the properties as well. Let's see. .NET Standard 2.0. That's perfect. That's all we need. The reference is still there. Okay. Everything builds. Cool. So an interesting feature about .NET Standard is that you can actually target multiple frameworks. So if we edit our project file, let's try that again. Okay, let's do it outside of Visual Studio with Notepad++. There we go. So we can rename this to the target frameworks. And we can add .NET for 5 in there. So now we no longer target just .NET Standard 2.0, we also target .NET 4.5 and higher. Let's unload the project and reload it. Okay. Let's see if we can get the properties to open. There we go. So now you see that the target framework option in the properties has been disabled. That's because there's more than one now. If you open any code file within a library, you get this drop down that allows you to select in which framework you're developing right now. So let me grab a code snippet here. If I add some compiler predirectives, so we're now in .NET Standards. This code is active, this one isn't. If we swap to .NET 4.5, it gets the other way around. This is also 2 times the same variable, and our compiler doesn't complain, because these if statements actually get executed by the compiler at compile time. Only one of these lines actually makes it into the intermediate language. And if you take a look at the output, you'll notice that for every framework, it generates a separate DLL. So this might also come in handy when you're porting over a set of applications, or you're starting a new application and you need to reference the same assembly. You can make its output to separate frameworks. Might come in handy. Okay, let's dive back into the slides. So when should you migrate? And this is the official guide from Microsoft. As far as WPF is concerned, if your application is in active development, migrate to .NET Core. If your app is finished or in maintenance mode, at least try to get it up to 4.8. And the same basically goes for WinForms. But if you depend on the WinForms editor, be careful. Try it out first. Make sure that it does everything that you need it to do. Or consider switching to Rider for this one. But do be careful with that. It is evolving, the editor. It's getting stable, but there might still be some dragons in there. Now, once you have your application, you need to distribute it. And I'm assuming that almost everyone has used at least one of these to get an application distributed to users. All of these got replaced by Msix. And Msix is a new packaging distributing system from Microsoft. And what it basically does is it containerizes your application, not in a Docker kind of way, but in like a virtual registry, virtual file system kind of way. So we've all been there. Huh? You have your computer set up, you install applications, you remove applications, your PC starts to go slower and slower and slower, and you need to reinstall it. That's called machine rot. And if you install everything using Msix, that no longer happens. The reason that it did happen is because every application installs itself in a different way. Different registry keys, different files and folders all around the file system. But not every application cleans up after itself once you uninstall it. Using Msix, you get a virtual file system and a virtual registry. If you uninstall the application, those two get removed completely and nothing stays behind. So that's a big plus. Another one is you can do differential updates. So if you push an update to your application, it doesn't download the entire application anymore. It just downloads the difference, the diff between the currently installed version and the new version. And you can even make it update automatically. It's kind of like an evolution of Click Once with some differences. how can you distribute this? So you can either go through the Windows Store. You can put your WPF WinForms applications on the Windows Store, or Microsoft Store it's called now. And one of the examples there is Paint.net. Paint.net is on the store, and I believe it's I'm not sure, it's either WinForms or WPF, but it's there. You can put it on a file share, your MSIX file. You can use an HTTPS endpoint. Basically start up an Azure web application and host it over there. It's perfectly fine. Let's have a quick look on how to do this. So let's create some packaging for the Pixelator. To create an MSIX file, we need to add a new project to the solution. And there's something called the Windows Application Packaging Project. Now, if you want to use this, you need to have the UWP, the Universal Windows Platform, workload installed in Visual Studio. If you don't have it, launch your Visual Studio installer, select UWP, let it update, and then you will have the Application Packaging Project. Give it a meaningful name. You need to select a target and a minimum version. Let's just leave it to default. And here it is. This is my installer project. If I right-click Applications, I can add a reference, select my WinForms project. Let's add it. See if it builds. There we go. Now I can right-click the package project and publish it, create app packages. I want to create a package for sideloading. I don't want my app on the store. I'm enabling automatic updates. And this is where you need to sign your application. The package that I'm creating won't be able to install because it doesn't have or it's not signed using a certificate that's trusted on my device. So if you actually want to distribute it, make sure that you sign it. I need an x86 version. You can add a path here where it will search for updates. So if I put in my share, every time the application starts, every time it runs, it will check for a new version on this location. You can put in your HTTPS endpoint here as well. Click Create. It will now build everything, package it up, and create my package for me. While we wait for this to finish, let's go to the already packaged version. So this is the output. You get an app installer, you get an index.html. If you open this one, you get this nice website. And this you can actually use to upload to an HTTPS endpoint to a web server. And if you click Get the App, it will try to install the application using the app installer. So that's something you get for free. If you dive into the folder, there's a bunch of stuff there, a bunch of PowerShell files. These will actually get used to install the application. But the most interesting thing is the app installer itself. If you open this using a zip application, 1 kilobyte, something might be wrong with this one. But that's okay because this one's finished. Okay, output location, let's have a look. I was missing this one. I was actually looking for the MSIX bundle. If you open this one using a zip application, here you will find the actual MSIX. It gets bundled up with some metadata. but this is the actual Msix file. If you dive into the Pixelator, you will notice that it includes all the .NET Framework namespaces that I need. So it's basically a self-contained application now. And I've actually uploaded this quite some time ago. The new browser window. Go. So I've uploaded the package and the HTML to an Azure web application. If I click get the app, it will open it. It can't install because the certificate that was used to sign this has expired. So it's too old, basically. But if everything checks out certificate-wise, the install button should be enabled. You can just install it. It will show up in your start menu like any normal application does. Let me quickly go back to the slides. So to round up, some takeaways. Desktop development is here to stay. It was never gone. People like to say that desktop development is dead and everything goes to the web, but it still has its place. The web can do many things, but native desktop applications can do many things as well. .NET Core is the way to go for new applications or applications that are in active development. And .NET Core is being renamed to .NET 5. If you start a new application, you should probably make it on .NET Core 3.1 for the long-term support, or .NET 6 next year. Any existing application can be migrated to .NET Core. They can all be migrated. There might be a difference in how hard it is, how much effort that needs to go into it. And for distribution, you can use Msix. I've added some resources here, some documentation, some blog posts from Microsoft itself. The final link here is the compatibility list for WinForms that shows you what things you need to replace, what APIs are deprecated, and so on. And yeah, that's basically the end of my presentation. Let me switch to the questions. Would you still recommend people to switch to an Msix deployment model now that they have introduced Click One support for .NET 3.1, .NET 5 WinApps? Yeah, the Click One support. Click One support is there, that's true, but Msix, I need to verify this, by the way, but I do believe that Msix is safer certificate signing wise and for the containerization. But yeah, there's a reason that they brought Click Ones back. So if that works for you, feel free to use it. Could you still use VS 2019 to edit a WinForm after you move to .NET 5? I mean, if the new VS and writer would fail. Interesting question. Let's find out. So I'm launching Pixelator in the stable version of Visual Studio 2019. Apparently not. Now, I'm not too sure that .NET 5 is the reason behind this. It might just be that the WinForms designer in the stable version is older than the one in the preview version, and this form might have something that's not compatible. No, that's not it, because otherwise it no, it can't open any of them. So probably not. No. Well, I have 10 seconds left, so that gives me just enough time to thank you all for coming. I hope you had something or you learned something today. Thank you all, and have a nice rest of your evening.